So what's God's purpose for Christians in the world? Not what's the mission. The mission's pretty clearly spelled out in one of the last things that Jesus said to his disciples before he went back to heaven. Go and make disciples of all nations. That's the mission. But what's God's purpose for Christians? What's God's purpose for Christians both in the world and for the world? Well, to answer that, I think it helps to have a little bit of an overview of the Bible story. So here's a quick recap. The world God made was perfect. But then Satan seduced Adam and Eve to believing his lies, and after that, sin entered the world, and everything became a really big mess. And chaos and disorder and live for me and me alone have pretty much, ruled the day ever since. But God didn't want that to stay forever, so Jesus died and rose to undo what Satan did. He came to fix the mess, both in people and in creation, and it worked. Okay, because of Jesus' death and resurrection, there will come a day that everything will be put right again. But that's not this day, is it? I mean, yes, because of Jesus, we are redeemed. Because of Jesus, we are forgiven. Because of Jesus, we have a hope and a future, so things have started to be put right. But not everything is right yet, is it? These days that we live in, they're still a mess. So back to the original question. What's God's purpose for believers in this particular moment in time in a messy and sin-stained world? Well, to help us see that purpose, Jesus makes an analogy from some everyday stuff. Salt and light. You find that in the next part of the Sermon on the Mount that we're looking at, Matthew chapter 5, beginning at verse 13. Listen.
You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.
Now, when I hear Jesus give that salt and light analogy, I'm making my connections with a 21st century frame of reference. So when I hear Jesus say, be salt, I'm thinking about salt as something that's a spice that adds taste or zest to food. I mean, that's one thing that makes chips taste so good, right? Salt. And it's why, even though I know it's not really good for me, I can't seem to resist those buy four and get each bag of chips for $2 sales at the grocery stores seem to be running all the time. Salty chips really hit the spot sometimes. Okay, a lot of times. Just like salty nuts and salted popcorn, and at this time of year, that freshly roasted and buttered corn that you put salt all over, that tastes so good. And I know at my age that too much salt really isn't good for me, but salt sure makes things taste better. And as for light, when I'm working on something in the house where it's kind of hard to see, like kind of dark under the sink when I'm working on something there, I'll put a headlamp on to help me see things a little better. Same with hiking. I take a headlamp along with me when I'm hiking in case I get delayed and it starts getting dark. The headlamp's going to help me see the trail and safely get where I'm going. Help me see stuff that I would trip over or something. I remember one time it was just vital I had that headlamp along because we got out of the canyon really late from fishing and we're climbing all the way out in the dark, and you fell off this trail and you fell off the side of the mountain. But I had my headlamp, a headlamp that was going to show me the way It was going to show me what to avoid. It was going to show me any danger that was lurking in the shadows. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of when I hear salt and light at first. Something that's tasty and something that's going to show me what's out there. All right, and those images then are going to influence what I think Jesus is telling me about our purpose here. So when I hear Jesus say, don't lose your saltiness, so there's a part of me thinking there then, well, he's saying don't let any outside influences make you lose your good taste. Keep yourself pure and uncorrupted by the outside world. And then when I hear Jesus say, let your light shine, I'm thinking he's telling me to shine a headlamp or maybe even a floodlight on all the bad that's out there so that I can see it and avoid it and keep from tripping up so I can keep safe. And the Bible does make those points. The Bible does say, don't be corrupted. And the Bible does say, let the light guide your path. I'm thinking of Psalm 119. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path. But when I think of Jesus' original audience, first century, not 21st century, and I look at salt and light with those first century eyes, then I think that Jesus is trying to tell me something different about my purpose in this world. You see, in Jesus' time, salt was used primarily not as a spice, but as a preservative. Jesus' day was a day without refrigeration. And in that hot and dry climate, things could really spoil pretty quickly, especially meat. And so salt was used as a preservative. And if you used enough of it, it would keep things from getting rotten or spoiling quite so fast. So what's Jesus saying here about our purpose in this fallen world? Well, I think what Jesus is saying is, the world is going bad. And sin is working its way through people's lives and turning them slowly rotten and ugly. But by your very presence there, you can be a preservative, right? By living a life patterned and modeled after me, by being kind and gracious, by being helpful even if there's nothing in it for you, by speaking gently and graciously and truthfully, by being patient and forbearing and yes, even forgiving. If you're pursuing that sort of blessedness that I was just talking about, if you're starting to live out those be like Jesus attitudes, then by that sort of a presence with and among people, you can slow down that decay, right? You are a preservative to keep the rottenness and decay that's in the world, to keep it from spreading. And so you're able to be an influence for good in your family, in your neighborhood, and in your community. That's your purpose. Now, stop and think about that before we move on in this conversation. What specific things can you do to stop sin's decay and spread and to be an influence for good? How can you do that in your family, in your neighborhood, and in your community? Go ahead and hit pause and think about that right now. Jesus says you're salt. So before we move on, stop and think and talk about how that's working for you. Now let's think about light with first century eyes. Jesus' world was a world without electricity, which meant it was really dark after the sun went down. And in fact, if it were a cloudy, moonless night, it could get so dark you couldn't see more than a few feet in front of your face. That's dark, all right? Really dark. And if you're out there in that sort of dark, it got pretty lonely pretty fast. And lonely often leads to scary. And scary often leads to helpless, and helpless often leads to hopeless. Not good feelings at all, any of those. But you know what? If there was a town nearby, even if the town was several miles away, there was this little light that could be given off by people's small little lamps, these little lamps that they just were like hand-sized and not very tall. They just held them in their hands. And those little lamps reflected a little light off the clouds, and that gave you a little more light to see by. And you could feel a little bit better about getting on with your journey through the dark and getting on to the morning. See, a little light can make a big difference. Light, even a little light, can make the dark, well, a little more bearable. And I think that's what Jesus is telling us here about our purpose. See, Jesus knows how messed up the world is. He knows how dark and how dreary it can get sometimes. And he knows how, because of the darkness, that people not only lose their way, that people, when the darkness is prolonged and deep, that people can also lose their hope. Right? And Jesus knows how crushing the weight of that darkness and that hopelessness can be. He's seen that all unfold since Adam and Eve sinned that very first time, and the darkness came over his world. And he's seen how it's pressing in on us in this present day. But Jesus knows that a little bit of light can make a big difference in the darkness. And I think that's what he's telling us when he's saying, let your light shine. He's saying that your purpose is to reflect his light to those around you, so that you can make the world a better and more bearable place, even when it's really, really dark out there. But wait a minute. Those lamps that Jesus was talking about, like I told you, they were really, really small. They like fit in the palm of your hand. They didn't give off a whole lot of light. When it's really dark out there, can one little light make a difference? Well, I'm thinking back to a story my dad told me back when he's in World War II that's still stuck in my head. He told me they were warned over and over again, it's dark out. Yeah, the enemy's miles away, but don't light any matches. You might want your cigarette. Don't light any matches. Don't put any lights on at all. And one guy in his unit was he said, this little light, that can't do anything. So he lit the match, and pretty soon they were diving for cover as the artillery shells rained in, because, even one little light in all that dark kind of showed the way. Ever been on one of those cave tours? You go down deep into the cave, and then the guides, well, it seems like every time you get to the bottom and they turn off the lights. And it gets so dark, you literally can't see your hand in front of your face. And then they shine a little pen light before they turn all the lights back on. One little light. But it sure makes a difference, right? And I think that's what Jesus is trying to say. One little light can make a difference in the dark. One little light can show the way. One little light can make the dark a little more bearable. One little light can provide hope and encouragement. One little light can show the possibility of a better way. And a whole lot of lights together, like that city on a hill that Jesus was talking about, well, a whole little lights together can even do a whole lot more, which is what Jesus is telling you about your purpose, and what he's telling us, all those lights together, about the purpose of the church. Your purpose is to bring hope. Your purpose is to bring hope to a dark and a dreary world. You bring hope by being light in those dark places. You bring hope by bringing a little light to those dark places. You bring hope by reflecting the light of Christ that lives in you. And you bring hope by a lot of little lights doing something to shine together, especially in those places where people are really feeling the weight of the darkness. And by being that sort of light, you're also pointing to Jesus, who is the light of the world that can and does overcome every kind of darkness.
The dark can be a bit scary. Things that are unknown, things that are unseen. The world can seem like a dark place sometimes. Sadness, pain, confusion. Even the smallest light can make you feel better. The Bible says that Jesus is the light of the world. His bright presence with us makes us happy. When Jesus lives in our hearts, we become little lights in the world too. So shine your light through every smile, every good deed, every act of love. Make the world a little brighter.
So looking at salt and light with those first century eyes, here's what I think that Jesus is telling us about our purpose. I'd summarize it this way. Your purpose is to be a presence for God and to be a presence for good in a dark and dreary world that's infected with a whole lot of bad. Jesus is saying, be a preservative, right? Help keep the bad from getting worse and help keep the decay from spreading so that Satan doesn't get more of a foothold in our homes and in our communities than he already has. And you do that by being good, right where you are. You do that by showing grace, right where you are. You do that by living out those be like Jesus attitudes, right where you are. Living things like humility and kindness, giving gentle answers rather than angry ones, being gracious in a very ungracious, a very harsh and angry world, listening to others in a world where very few people do anymore, and making time for others in a world where a whole lot of people seem to have time only for themselves. See, that has a way of keeping the crud from spreading. And it also brings a little bit of light into a world that has gotten pretty dark. And that gives people hope. And so does this. Right? You give people hope when you show them that light still exists, even in a fallen and dark world. You give people hope when you show that light actually works, and that it might actually work a whole lot better than some of the things people are trying in the darkness. And you give people hope, because by being a light, and by being lights together as the church, you're pointing people to Jesus. Jesus, the light of the world, the one who can and has and does overcome any darkness. You give people hope when you let them see that the darkness doesn't win, that Jesus does. You know, here's some Bible on that. Psalm 27, verse 1, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life." John chapter 1, "In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That's truth. And your purpose in this world is to show it. To show that Jesus, who has seen you through the darkness, that maybe he's seeing you through the darkness right now, to show that as you live that out and share that story with others, you help keep the darkness from swallowing others up. and you give him hope. You give him hope that not only is Jesus there, but you give him hope that Jesus just might have a better way.